Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH show. As always, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by a teacher and a transgender campaigner, Dr. Debbie Hayton. Thanks for joining me.
You're very welcome, Dennis.
Okay, Dr. Debbie, I'll just call you Debbie. I suppose the best way to start is just, give us a trajectory of your life. You're already quite popular. You're already quite a popular voice within the transgender landscape. But for the benefit of those who haven't come across with your line of work, can you please tell us who you are, what you do? Give us an abridged version of your life so we can sort of situate your core values and the kind of activism that you're known for.
Yeah, well, what people see online is a tiny fraction of my life. Most of the time, I'm a normal human being. I'm married. I have 3 children. I'm a physicist by training. I've been teaching in secondary schools now for 25 years. I transitioned 8 years ago from male to female in post. And really, after I transitioned, I remained in obscurity for a long time until about 3 years ago, and I was becoming increasingly concerned with what I saw as a form of transgender activism that wasn't helping me live my life in the workplace, and I was rather concerned that it may start having a negative impact. So I started opening my mouth when people made arguments I disagreed with. And over the course of really 3 years, or just over 3 years now, I've become increasingly vocal in this debate because I think it's important for different people to have a say. And also, I think it's important for people to say what they think rather than what they think they ought to think, which can sometimes be the case.
Mm-hmm. I just want to dig deeper to the personal side of your story. Would you mind telling us how did your wife and your children take of your decision to transition? And are you still married now? Are you still living with your wife, with your children, or is it a completely different arrangement now?
No, we still live together as a family. We got through it together. It was hard for them. My partner tells that story better than me, actually. For her, she was in a position where she was essentially holding the family together, while I was in the middle of a mental health crisis at the time. What the pressures did to me, which essentially pushed me into transition, was huge. So I wasn't in much of a state to support anybody, and it was left to my partner to try to work out for herself what was going on, and also to support our children, who were young teenagers at the time. Now we're still married. Our children, two are away from home now. One is still at home, so we're about to enter the next life stage where children have gone. But we did manage to work through that episode, but it really was difficult, and especially for my partner.
Yeah, I'm quite pleased to hear that you managed to come up with some sort of arrangement, to I suppose to reconcile your decision in terms of your family arrangement. But yeah, that's good that you've got a family and a wife was quite supportive of your decision. Now, I'd just like to start with the basics. I suppose I can Google this, but can you please enlighten us with the difference between a transgender and a transsexual?
Well, we're getting into terminology, and the problem in terminology is everybody defines the terms differently. The original word was transsexual, and it contrasted with transvestite. Those two words existed 20, 30 years ago. When I was growing up in the 1980s, there were transsexuals, no transvestites. Transsexuals were a group which we didn't hear much about. There didn't seem to be many of them. They clearly changed their bodies to fit in to be with the opposite sex, but that it wasn't necessarily clear what they did and why. As people in society, they were almost pitted really as people who had such a serious issues that they had to do this. At the same time, there were transvestites who were not seen as objects of, they weren't seen as objects of pity, they were seen as objects of ridicule. Men who would furtively disappear to their rooms, go on golfing weekends was the terminology with their friends, and essentially ridiculed for possibly for being an affront to masculinity. But the two groups were seen as very different. Whether they were different is whether they were ever different is a different question. There's an old joke in the trans community, which goes back a number of years now, was what's the difference between a transvestite and a transsexual? And the answer is about 5 years. As somebody starts coming out and starts accepting themselves, first of all, there's a dressing phase, and when that can't satisfy the need, then there's a change in the body phase. Sorry.
It reminds me of the character in Little Britain. This might be an awkward joke, but you know that character they play. I'm a lady. I suppose that kind of exemplify what transvestite and transgender are. But please carry on with your point.
Well, those two categories have emerged. We don't hear much about transsexuals anymore. I do use the term because I think it means something. Trans as in opposite, and sex as in a biological role. So it means to me it means I identify with the opposite sex. So that's why I use it. But transsexual you don't hear much from, and transvestite you don't. It really has become a pejorative term that we don't use anymore. And both terms have been subsumed into this word transgender, which encompasses everything as a huge umbrella. In doing so, it's very inclusive, but at the same time, it's blurred out language and taken away nuance. So we're losing the capacity to think about different aspects of what it means to be trans, because there is one word which explains everything these days. And I guess it's like what George Orwell tried to do in Newspeak. It's with his Newspeak in 1984. It's by changing language, you change the way people think, and that I think is something which we really need to get a grip of.
I want to pick on how you phrase it. You said you identify with the opposite sex, whereas the common thing that you would hear is I identify as the opposite sex. And I think you come across as, I don't know what's a better way to put it, but you think you come across as some people would consider some sort of like a curious anomaly, if you will, because in a sense, you're quite vocal with your assertion that trans women are men, whereas the default expectation would be is if you are trans woman, your default assertion would be I'm a woman, but you're really a curious anomaly. So could you just expound the rationale behind that assertion that you identify with the opposite sex, but you're not the opposite sex? Could you expound on that, please?
Okay, I like being a curious anomaly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not the opposite sex. There are two sexes. It's an argument which has been hashed out a lot of times. Human beings are sexually dimorphic, like other mammals. There are two sexes, male and female. Where every human being is one sex or the other. I'm male, and there's reasons why I'm male. It's down to my biology, not my psychology. So I've no problems with that. It took me a while to reconcile that to my own position. But it's something where I'm quite happy to say I'm male, I'm a male human being, and what's wrong with being a male human being? I like to think of myself there as, perhaps to misquote somebody else, another campaigner, to say I'm expanding the bandwidth of what it means to be male. Now, when you talk about I'm a man, I know I have a rather provocative T-shirt, which I've got to be careful where I wear. But that was a political statement to basically say, trans women are men, get over it. Because I think if we do, as trans people, get over those sort of political statements, then we're in a much healthier place in ourselves, which is why I put the statement forwards. Do I think I am a man? Well, on a philosophical level, it depends on how you define the term. If you define the term as an adult human male, then yes, I am. But is every adult human male a man? That's the question. That's the question which we need to be talking about. Or are trans women a separate category of human male because of the way we interact with society? That's why I use the word "with." How we interact with society, how we feel about ourselves, and how we project ourselves in society. Perhaps we are, perhaps we aren't. But these I think are philosophical discussions which I think are really good to have. But at the same time, when I go to work, it's irrelevant when I go to work. I go to work as Debbie Hayton teaching children, and in an environment where men and women do the exactly the same job, and whether my sex is male or female isn't an issue. So yeah, it is. These are interesting things to talk about. But I can talk about them on an intellectual level in order to really understand the underlying conditions that lead people to do something so bizarre as to transition their role in society, and then to go further and to make serious changes to their bodies, which is a big issue. And I think I'd like us to be exploring the reasons for that, rather than the issues of are trans women women or trans women men. Just let's say trans women are trans women, which I think probably makes more sense in this situation.
And following on that, how do you fit in your argument with your perspectives about, let's say, self-identification and being non-binary? What's your take on those? What do you think about those things?
Well, I think the problem is we conflate sex and gender. So when we're talking about non-binary, and when we're talking about gender identity, and when we're talking about other issues, everything gets confused. Language has been conflated and confused. In terms of sex, as I've said before, there are two sexes, and I don't think you can change it. And I would argue that strongly. In terms of gender, what actually is gender? Somebody, others have argued that there's 8 billion genders on the face of the earth, and I probably agree with them actually. That gender is an expression of our personality, and as such, there is just no sense in having a binary there. We can argue that every one of us is non-binary. It's just some of us, I guess, can fit in better to the social constructs that society imposes on us because of our sex. And also the expectations that I think also what's missed is the expectations we have on ourselves according to our sex as well. I think that's a question which needs to be, those expectations of self is a question that needs to be explored far more than it has been.
Thank you. Now, I just want to explore more a bit of political dynamic here. I understand you're a Labour supporter.
Yeah.
And of course, we're aware, by and large, the Labour Party is a party rich with identity politics and intersectionality. So I just want to, because I find this interesting, I just want to share a tweet from Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. He said, trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary people are non-binary, all gender identities are valid. And then you kind of, address those. You try to, tell him that it's not, that's not the case. Trans women are male, women are female, male is not female, trans women are not women. And you address that on your earlier points. What I'm trying to say is that, Sadiq Khan is a Labour mayor, and then you've also got Jeremy Corbyn, who's Jeremy Corbyn, who at one point proclaimed his preferred pronouns. And I think there's a bit of a, how do I say it? There's a bit of a mismatch between what you're trying to say and the kind of, the predominant narrative in relation to transgenderism in Labour Party. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that how do you navigate, transgenderism and being a Labour supporter?
Well, it's not just the Labour Party, to be fair. The Liberal Democrats were pulled apart before the last election over this. The SNP is facing huge internal strife over it, and it was the Conservatives. It was a Conservative MP who first brought this to Parliament in 2016. So it goes across politics. It's not specifically a Labour Party issue. But being a Labour Party member and a Labour Party supporter, it's a Labour Party that I'm concerned about. For Sadiq Khan to say that, when he talks about non-binary people are non-binary, I think we're all non-binary. I've said that before, so I've no problems with that particular part of his quote. And all gender identities are valid. And I'm thinking, well, we could get into a philosophical argument over what gender identity is. I don't think it exists. I think it's been a term which has been made up, and then understanding has been generated by language rather than the other way around. But it's the first two points which are taken almost as a statement of doctrine. Trans women are women, trans men are men, and I would argue it's just not true. So by replying to the mayor, I tried to present an argument that shows it isn't true. That the key, what is a woman? Well, you need some defining quality, and what we've used since the dawn of time is two sexes. One sex, women are one sex, and men are the other sex. Whether there's any other categories in those two sexes is separate. So I didn't reply to the mayor and say trans women are men, because I don't think that's necessary. But what I wanted to say and wanted to show is that his comment that trans women are women is necessarily incorrect. And if we're trying to build policy and also trying to base transgender rights on these untruths, then we're not going to be generating very good policy. And heaven help transgender rights. When we're trying to base rights on what I would consider to be untruths, we need to base our rights on what is true. And for me, that would be a right of people of both sexes to express themselves in society in a way which is consistent with their own sex, which most people are happy with that, which is consistent with the expectations on the opposite sex, which I guess I do, or also, express themselves in a way which is consistent of neither sex, which is how people who would identify as non-binary would do that as well. And I think those rights need to be protected. Almost like, I think we need to get away from trying to protect identities, which is what we are, and start going back to protecting actions. Because this is where we were about 10 years ago when we were fighting for the equalisation of the age of consent. That was for people to have rights to do things, to have sexual relationships with people of their own sex in the same way with people of the opposite sex. When we campaigned for equal marriage, that was a campaign for people to do things, to marry people of the opposite sex. This is different because this is trying to campaign for people to be things, and that makes it a totally different issue. And it's one which I think is unhelpful against the identity politics. And we should be returning to be thinking about what is it that we should be protecting trans people to do. And as I say, it's expressing ourselves and also be able to work and not be dismissed for being trans, enjoy good, provision of goods and services like everybody else without being discriminated against for being trans. Those are the campaigns we should be fighting, and on those I believe we'd have overwhelming support from everybody across the country. But what we're trying to do is by engaging in the identity politics, we're opening up things that are not true, causing dreadful concerns among women who see that their own rights are being potentially usurped here, and meeting lots of opposition, which we shouldn't have generated. That's the tragedy of the last 5 years, is the opposition which we've generated through this.
That actually leads me to my next question. I'm not yet so sure about this, but in 2020, gender athletes may take part in the Olympic Games for the first time. But allowing transgender women to compete in women's sports is already provoking a heated debate about inclusion and fairness. So how should we address that in your opinion?
Transgender women, trans women should not be in women's sport. The categories are there for good reason. To divide it on biological sex, which is what's happened originally, is fair. A few years ago, I haven't got the figures to hand. A few years ago, trans women were included on the basis of some really rigid criteria, including gender recognition surgery, gender reassignment surgery. The numbers involved were so small that it didn't have an impact. But what's happened is the rules have been changed so that any male person who identifies as a woman, whatever that means to identify as a woman, who identifies as a woman and then lowers their testosterone level below a purely arbitrary level, can then compete in the women's category. And if that's not an open door to abuse, both on the grounds of individuals, but more seriously on a governmental level, then I don't know what is. When I was growing up in the 1980s, there was the regime in Germany, the German Democratic Republic, went to town on all this. They dosed their female athletes with testosterone in order to improve their performance, and then took them off the testosterone before any testing was taken, so they came out within range. Now that's within my lifetime. If other similar regimes today don't spot this as a way to win gold medals, then they're probably not paying attention. So I see it as I see this as a really negative impact on, firstly, women's sports, where transgender women will start winning things, and countries will either have to respond in kind or accept that they're not going to win medals, or alternative, and so as well as being a negative impact on women's sport, seeing trans women after trans women winning women's events unfairly, in my view, is not going to be helpful to trans women who are trying to live their lives quietly in society. We're going to be seen as part of this problem when we're not.
And does your view also apply to beauty pageants? Because I don't remember the exact year, but I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago, but Miss Spain was allowed for the first time, a trans woman was allowed first time to join Miss Universe and represent her country. Does that also apply to that?
No, beauty pageants, I'd abolish them. I think they're sexist and they're dreadful, and they objectify people. So I would have nothing to do with beauty pageants. In that case, it's not an issue which, therefore, I've really considered. Should trans women be able to take part in that? Well, why not just open them up to both sexes? Why should it be Miss Spain? Why should those pageants not be opened up to attractive people of both sexes, who are attractive human beings in mentally as well as physically, to represent their country? That might be the best way forwards on that.
Well, because the argument is Miss Universe, so it should just be women, and as we're talking about trans women, well, for some people trans women are women, so they join Miss Universe. But yeah, I can see that this is actually quite a heated area, when we talk about trans women and sports and beauty pageants. And I was looking at your timeline on Twitter, and sometimes it's quite full of hate, and I think hate is a strong word to use. Sometimes people are so passionate about what they believe in, but how do you think people can have a more civilized and healthy debate towards transgenderism?
Well, you brought up two issues there. There's the overall debate, and there's Twitter. Twitter is it is a dreadful environment in which to conduct debate, because all you have the words on the screen. Mentally, you just look at words on the screen, and you don't necessarily see the human being behind those words. And as you say, people get very passionate. You may be talking to somebody who is upset, annoyed. You just don't know. There is no body language at all, and the temptation is just to fire back like with like, which I try not to do. The nature of Twitter, it's overall user interface, where you can pick somebody's words up and quote them to your followers, and then they don't get tagged into the replies to that. It really is. You can argue that Twitter is designed to cause these you know, these nasty interactions. I won't call them arguments. They're but nasty interactions. But it's all we've got. This is the problem. And to engage with other people outside your little group of perhaps WhatsApp or email contacts, your personal friends, and also perhaps a wider group of Facebook friends. Twitter is a way of reaching people across the world, and it does. So it's all we've got. But the problem is, it does generate such horrible, heated interactions. I try not to respond like we like, and just think, you know, there is a real human being sitting at the other end of this who has said this about me, and why have they said this about me? Possibly they're projecting issues of their own insecurities. Perhaps they're upset. Perhaps they're hurt, and it is easy to cause offence and cause upset without meaning to. And sometimes I guess my work does that. Now, in real life, if you see somebody upset with you, then natural to calm them down. But as on Twitter, people don't do that, and it just gets inflamed and inflamed and inflamed and inflamed, and it's just horrid. That's Twitter. The wider debate is one where I think we need to have more confidence in ourselves as human beings, and have more confidence in our interlocutors, you know, the people we're talking to as human beings, and then try to separate these arguments out, much as what we would do in normal politics. I have been a political campaigner for 30 years. I've regularly sat down with people with opposite political opinions from me. You know, I've sat down with conservatives to talk about issues, about how we can, they will talk about their case, I'll talk about mine, how we can find common purpose.
Yeah, I'm also a conservative.
Right. But this has been worse than Brexit. Brexit was bad. In that it became so personal. But I remember in a Brexit debate, I'm a Remainer, and in the Brexit debate, I was talking with other Remainers who happened to be conservatives, and I'm thinking, heck, this is bringing us together. But what's happened in the gender debate? This runs even deeper. Whereas in the gender debate, I find that I'm talking to Brexiters.
Yeah.
And finding common purpose with them, and you're thinking, well, this is running even deeper than Brexit, which has torn the country apart, and this seems to be even worse. And that worries me, because we should be talking about issues, we should be talking about arguments in order to generate good policy which supports trans people without being negative to women. And when we're looking to support minority groups, good policy is good policy for everybody. It supports the minority group and also supports other people. Whereas what's happening here is one group is being pitted against another, and it's which group can find the loudest voice, or the biggest platform in which to displace the other, and that's not helpful.
Well, I suppose you mentioned about, you know, people have got differing opinions, but they can actually engage in a healthy and civilized debate. Well, in fact, you mentioned about you being a Labour supporter. I'm a Conservative. You mentioned you being a Leaver. I'm actually a Brexiter. You are a Remainer. I'm a Brexiter. I think this is quite a demonstration that we can actually engage in a debate, engage in a conversation, even though we've got different opinions on things, we've got different opinions on politics. So are you actually optimistic for 2020? Do you think that there will be changes within the discourse of transgenderism, or within the way we actually talk about this, you know, instead of just, you know, attacking each other? Do you think we will have a more, shall we say, civilized take on things?
I worry, because political leaders need to take responsibility. What I see, and I may be being unfair on them, what I see are people who would rather this went away, hoping it goes away by itself, and not really engaging with it. I hear people saying trans women are women, as the London Mayor said. But has the London Met really got to grips with the issues which are facing transgender people? When trans people go through a transition, as I know for myself, the impact on mental health is absolutely enormous. But this psychotherapy isn't on offer from the NHS for this. It would be so expensive. When trans people are looking for specialist advice from gender clinics, the wait lists are now over 2 years for a first appointment. The London Gender Clinic is not, as far as I can see, not taking first appointments because they're overwhelmed with their current clientele. But people aren't talking about that. So I'm not convinced that the people who are saying things are really engaging with the issues. So, and I think those people need to. And they do need to listen to a wider, wider set of voices, or be seen to. That's probably more seriously because they do listen to me, and they do listen to people I agree with. But it's being seen to, and say to different groups to say, look, I'm talking to Women's Place UK. I'm talking to Fair Play for Women because I think they've got valid arguments. We've got to get this right. But until political leaders do that openly and probably risk a lot of noise and negativity from a transgender activist base, which they know they will get, then I don't think we'll make much progress.
So you think that it would be better if before making comments like that, like Sadiq Khan, you should actually get involved with debates and arguments about this? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and look at issues. Look at what trans people actually need. Look at cases of and look at what transphobia actually is. There was a case reported by the BBC yesterday of a case in Sheffield where a trans woman was subjected to a dreadful arson attack. A man was sent down for 5 years for this. That's transphobia. But at the same time, we're told that transphobia is when people look at me a bit funny in the street, when people overlook my preferred pronouns, when people would rather not sit next to. Well, come on, this is human interaction. We can't demand to be liked by everybody. We can't do that. But we get the debate has been so trivialized by cases of transphobia which are not transphobia. When people basically say, "I don't want to be your friend," that's not transphobia. It's when people pull burning pieces of paper through your letterbox. That's transphobia, and we need to get back to that and focus on those issues which happen, in order that our rights will be taken more seriously. If we focus on the trivial, we are trivializing the problem, and there's too much of that.
Yeah, I like what you said, that we should really identify what transphobia is, rather than just trying to. I hate to use the word virtue signaling on Twitter, because it's a lot easier to do rather than identifying what transphobia is. Now, Debbie, this is already my final question to you. What is the most important thing you want the public to know about your work, and what are your future plans? Do you have any lectures, or are you going to write for other media outlets?
I'll continue to write, because I think the debate's got somewhere to go as it is. I've written 3 pieces in the last week for different publications on the same issue, which is the crisis in the Labour Party, and that's just one issue. But the debate is much wider than that. What I would really like to focus on and get across is a proper understanding of what causes people to transition. Where does this need for transition come from? Because I don't think the current ideology that we all have a gender identity. I don't have one. I can't identify my gender identity. That we have a gender identity which is innate, which can be male or female, which then can be in contradiction to our biological sex, and that causes the need to transition. I there is no justification for that as far as I can see. It's an unprovable idea and it's an unfalsifiable idea. And as such, I think we should set that aside and look at other reasons on why people feel they need to transition, because I did, and what actually caused that in me. If I properly understand that, then I'm in a much better place mentally myself, and other people are as well. Now, essentially what I did by transitioning is I reintegrated myself into society in a role which is consistent with women as opposed to men. So why did I need to do that? Because as I said before with my teaching, I go to work, I do exactly the same job in female role as I did in male role, exactly. When I'm walking down the street, it doesn't matter. I may wear slightly different clothes, but I could have done that as a man. You know, with no rules in society of what men can wear and what women can wear. The biggest difference between women and men is our sexual orientation, and it's how we relate to the other sex sexually. So that's where we need to be looking, and at our sexual orientation. So in that context, you're looking at, why did I have this need to transition? Why did I need to change my body? Because clothes didn't do it for me, and clothes were never the issue. Why did I need to change my body to make it resemble the opposite sex? And that's something which ties in with sexual orientation. Where is the locus of my sexual orientation, or what competes for that? Does my own body compete for that? Well, that makes sense if in the context of having to change it. Others have got different reasons for this need to transition. You know, the division of male transsexuals into autogynephilic types and homosexual types goes back years. We're now seeing a huge incidence of needs to transition among teenage girls. Where's that coming from? Is that a different is that a different cause? I think it is. And we need to be exploring these issues, because to help people, we really need to understand what's causing these needs within them. And just to say it's because you've got a gender identity which is inconsistent with your biological sex is not cutting it. And it's letting people down. So I'd like to move on beyond that to actually understand not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. That is the key to where I think we need to be moving on to.
And I don't know if you already have you already written a book on this?
I haven't written a book. I have plans to. But
I think you should. Yeah, I think you should. Yeah, not just physics. I think this is more interesting to talk about rather than physics. That's because I was not a good student when I was doing my physics. It's hard. Yeah. So I really admire you. Debbie, it's been an insightful conversation with you, but unfortunately our time is up. I'm aware that you have a rather limited video resources of you talking at full length, because when I was looking for you, there was just rather, like snippets of, what your ideas are. So I'm really appreciative that you joined me on this podcast, and something to add to, the available resources of you talking in greater detail. All the best, Debbie.
You're very welcome, Dennis. It's been really good to talk to you.
Thank you.